Welcome to Campaigns and Coffee. Grab your mug and let's dive into Tales of Adventure. Today we're talking about restarting an RPG game after a hiatus. So, first question, what the heck's a hiatus? Like, seriously, is it? And is it purposeful or is it inadvertent? Or all of the above?
My games, because everybody is very busy adults with things to do, will go weeks, sometimes over a month, between sessions. We're picking up a D&D game tonight, in fact, that was a while back. So, I am looking at maybe taking one of my games and actually mothballing it for a while. I'm just uninspired right now. And, trying to hey, let's just do a monster of the week for this endless campaign that I have no plot for. Just isn't as interesting to me as it might have been at one point. So, I think hiatus really varies from game to game. I'm given to understand that there are some people who play every week. And so for them, 6 weeks might be a hiatus. I think a lot of the practices could be applied to both situations.
Yeah, and I think there's so for me, I think for right now, post-pandemic and in 50-something middle age, most of my hiatuses are like yours, just like inadvertent. Everybody got really busy. It's going to be a couple of weeks and we'll come back to it. So I think that's certainly what we have with our Cyberpunk Red campaign right now. We ended in the middle of a cliffhanger and we'll just pick right up when we go there. Meanwhile, I have my Secrets of the Saltmarsh campaign, which was fun, was with my real world friends, just kind of petered out. Then the pandemic happened. And so that would be prime for going back, but it just kind of died on the vine, right? Kind of just ended, as opposed to other ones, which might have, the campaign itself might have concluded on a very strong, and we have ended the story, or at least ended the major arc, and now you're primed to begin again in a new way. Josh, do you have thoughts on hiatus?
So I do have a game that we do weekly, and we've been off for the last, I want to say almost a month now. We haven't played in 4 weeks. So I consider that a hiatus for that game. But yeah, if it's a game that you aren't necessarily playing every week or so, then a week or two off in between probably isn't going to matter too much. But yeah, right. I would consider our Cyberpunk Red a decent hiatus.
Yes.
You just said it ended on a cliffhanger and I was like, wait, what was the cliffhanger that we ended up on?
There were biomechanical cyberpunked crows, chromed up crows, hungry for your flesh.
I think any time where you have started and had multiple sessions of a different campaign between the time that you last played your other one, we consider that a hiatus.
You may be on a hiatus. So, talking about some ways to deal with it. So I had jotted down some notes ahead of time, which is a little bit crazy for us on Campaigns and Coffee, because sometimes we just go off the top of our heads. But so I think the first thing you could do, and I think this is where we're at with Cyberpunk Red, which is kind of regardless of how much time has passed, the campaign didn't end in a place, or the campaign didn't go on hiatus in a place where you would just try one of these other techniques. So it's just recap and relaunch into it, right? So we'll go, I'll have a nice little intro about what happened before. The intro will end on an ominous notes about corvids that are hungry for your chrome and for your blood, and then properly terrified, you will prepare to go into the death dungeon. Oh, I'm sorry, the abandoned headquarters of Elysium HQ, right? And so I think you would use that if you have all the same players as you had before, you ended in the middle of an adventure, or maybe you ended after a story arc, but not after a campaign. And I think a good example of this would be in movies like Dune 2, right? In Dune 1, we got to a logical breaking point. We kind of wanted some more, but gosh darn it, we needed a hiatus because whatever. They just didn't film them back to back. But if it were a campaign, right, you could see the campaign got to a kind of a logical breaking point. But now here all the PCs are back. We're going to launch into the second movie.
Yeah, I think the key to picking things back up again, I think there's two things that I rely on, or have come to rely on, because I didn't start this way. I used to just kind of where'd I leave the tokens on Roll20? What was I doing? How was I? But a hiatus in play doesn't mean a hiatus for the GM necessarily. I thanks to, I think it was David who turned me onto it. I've been using Obsidian for about a year now. And as a growing, wiki information of the campaigns, it's been absolutely invaluable. And the other great thing has been in each game that I have that has this hiatus issue, I have a player who really enjoys taking notes and recapping the session in a shared wiki-like space. We use Scabbard. It's scabbard.com for this. But we put up the session notes. And then when we sit back down, everyone, it's literally at the table often. People get on their phones and read through what we just went through and remind themselves where we were. It's like decaf coffee. It's not the greatest. Because you'd prefer to be, have it fresh from a week before, almost that like Buffy feeling, like when it ended on a cliffhanger and you look forward to the next episode and all of that. But it's enough, So like on my end, I will go in and work on the world and kind of flesh out what's going around. I try to touch the campaign like once a week to try to keep things fresh for myself. And then the player notes are really good because I don't expect the players to remember jack shit to remember anything. Sorry about that, Ken. Anything other than maybe their character sheets. And even that's kind of that's lucky some weeks. So, especially as we all get older, notes, just notes.
Yeah, and I think being in the habit of having taken notes for the previous session and posted them somewhere, I do that I try to do that in our forum, where like this is where I got to, or at least as a DM, I have written down what we did before, so I can remember what the heck we did before, because I don't necessarily have that player who's taking the notes for me. But all right. So another way to handle things would be time skip forward, right? So some amount of time has passed, maybe 6 months, maybe a year, maybe 10 years. I think it depends on where your campaign was and what you were trying to accomplish. I think you could use it if you have a mix of new and old players, want to introduce new ideas or new characters to reinvigorate the campaign or address some known shortcomings. So like Chris, you were referring to like the campaign that you kind of lost the motivation for. Suddenly you have the idea like, oh, this is what I should do. But you know what? I want some pacing. I want some padding between what we did last and what we're doing now so that I can kind of set this up. And so I think for movie examples, Empire Strikes Back, Mad Max, Fury Road, right? Like who knows what happened in between to Max, but he ends up in a bad place yet again. And oh, look, there's this whole new group of people for him to interact with, right? And there's only one character. That's the one character that carried forward from the previous campaign. And Furiosa is going to take over for him anyway. So what do you guys think of the time skip?
I've used it occasionally, and it generally works, but you've got to make sure you leave it in a good place.
Yes.
As well. Like you can't time skip after a cliffhanger or you're going to face a rebellion. It's, I think we've all been screwed by TV shows that did that, ended on some sort of weird cliffhanger, and then they undo it at the beginning of the next season. It's like, yeah. So, but, so there's a little planning that's got to be involved. Sometimes you don't have a choice, right? Sometimes it is what it is. But I would use it judiciously, only because if you, I don't know, it's Chekhov's gun, right? If you ended on a cliffhanger,
right,
you better give them a way to get off the cliff the next time you start the game.
Me personally, I'm not a huge fan of the time skip unless you've ended a campaign and you want to start a brand new one with like probably different characters. Mm-hmm. Like if you just want to time skip the world a little bit and start off in like a different time period in the actual world that you've built, then that's totally fine. But if you're going to try to time skip in the middle of a campaign,
I think it depends on how you run your campaign. I think we've talked about in the past the idea of the infinite campaign versus doing like seasons, like a 6-episode season.
Right.
I'm trying to do seasons for myself, so like I I brought a storyline to a close, and then we time skipped 3 months.
Okay.
Right.
You know, that kind of thing. It'd be like, okay, in that 3 months, what do you want to do? Because that's like training time, or that's, or whatever. But, we do the montage, and, we put on some Ferris Bueller, yellow in the background, and everybody goes and does their thing. And then we pick back up, but it gives everybody a little bit of, I think there's something to be said for the palate cleanser of resetting the characters, because I've noticed it with some of my players that if we just go from crisis to crisis to crisis, the players get the fatigue that the characters should be experiencing. Do you know what I mean? Like, it begins to stress out the players.
Right.
And it's a real thing.
So I think I will say, so for my Saltmarsh campaign, I could see doing something like this, because it kind of petered out. And honestly, I don't even remember what the last note was, what the last session actually was. There were some NPCs who were in motion. Like, there was this evil druid-like creature up to the north. The guys, I think, were maybe lost out at sea. Their former gnome adventuring companion was being pickled inside of a big barrel of rum. And they were just kind of bobbing along in the ocean, right? And so for that, I could say, okay, 6 months have passed. Everybody, you've leveled up your characters. Gnome is still dead in a barrel of rum, but his brother just showed up, and there's awkward questions, right? And nobody really cares what happened before, because again, it just sort of petered out, right? And so we're trying to relaunch and reinvigorate and what have you. I could also see using a variation of this to just go into downtime. Right. So we've had a lot of fun with downtime in different games. Right. And so you could basically say, and we had 6 months of downtime. What did your characters do? What were you off doing? Right. And so you could have some of that solo RPGing goodness, or you could have, just brainstorm. Well, you know what? My guy was always meant to go find his knight mentor. And so I've been off. And the reason why I leveled up is because now I've got this cool new sword that I got that is my father's, and I will avenge his death, because I learned that he got killed, right? And everybody goes off, and I learned all these spells because I met with the wizard, and I just been drunk in the bar for the last 6 months. What the hell? I don't know why I have these powers.
That actually kind of brings up a interesting thing, though. Would you, since this is coming back from a hiatus anyway, would you, during that hiatus, try to get people one-on-one to kind of roleplay what they did in their little... how did you get that sword? It's cool. I came back with a brand new cool sword and no story on how I got it.
Yeah, I think, if you're trying to get the band back together again, that could be one of the ways to get the band back together again. If people are a little bit on the fence, and you're you as the game master, or you as just the player, hey, I had this idea, right? And then here's what I'm giving you. Spark any ideas? So people aren't necessarily coming in cold. They've done the prep work, and then maybe that's how you're assembling the group to actually get people enthused to come back and do it, right? Ooh, new sword, and I'm 2 levels higher? Sure, I'll do that.
The one thing about time skips that I dislike is kind of that. I'm 2 levels higher. I come back with all this cool, new, awesome gear and everything like that, and nobody knows how, but... Maybe we'll do a flashback so that I can make something up on the fly.
It's good for a hook. Yeah, I mean, I've done the one-on-one thing when the players want to.
Right.
I usually leave it open to the players. I don't force it. Hey, if you want to play this out, we can do that. I think one of the things that you can switch to is just kind of switch gears from all right, you have been doing racing through the city adventure. Maybe we look at the base building subgame. A lot of RPGs have that now, where you have a base or a ship or something you're going to augment. Good example, in my Dresden Files game, we kind of came to the end of an arc of sorts, and they had this pot of money. And I'm like, what do you want to do with the money? And said, we want to build a garage for the one guy that's the auto mechanic, and we're also going to use it as our base. Okay, get some paper. Let's design the garage. Right. What do you want in it? Let's break it down. And and that leads to everybody looking things up in tables and figuring out. But everybody begins to work together on this thing that then going forward they're invested in.
Right.
And so, there are some sub games that we have in these systems now that we probably had before. I mean, there was a whole thing about having a castle in AD&D at the very beginning, with costs and all of that. But, it's become so prevalent because of things like, the stuff in Pillars of Eternity, where if you had certain things, you got certain bonuses, and then Vesson and Scum and Villainy and Starforged with building your ship up. Make that part of the game. Make that let them have a headquarters, a Hall of Justice, a something, so that they can invest in it.
I'll add this in real quick because I know Ken, you want to move on to the next thing, but I will say one of the cool parts about the last campaign that I was in with my weekly group, we had a little 3-week time period where we literally took a camp and turned it into a city, and we had to build the city and put the defenses in and stuff like that. It was probably one of my favorite parts of the campaign. I was like, can we just do this from now on? So I totally agree.
So Josh, you mentioned flashbacks, since that was another thought we had. So I think a flashback, and so I have to say I've only used this the next two techniques once or twice, and some things might lend themselves to campaigns better than others. But I think using a flashback is good when you want to highlight a particular story element. You want to provide some context for what happened in between. You want to get people reacquainted with the rules. So you want to do basically the session 0 for your new game, for the new chapter, but you've got 3 new people who are coming in and they've never played Fallout before, or they've never played, Scum and Villainy before. And you also maybe need to introduce some new PCs. Where did this bard show up? What? Who's this guy? Well, instead of meeting him in a bar and just having him join the party, maybe there's a flashback to when you met the bard. And now, actually, 2 years ago, there was this chance encounter, and, because we never tell the whole story, right? And so maybe there was this chance encounter where you dealt with some threat, and now the bard has showed up looking for some help. So there's a built-in hook. I think the example that came to mind for me was the Lord of the Rings, because if I remember correctly, each Lord of the Rings movie began with a flashback that told you a part of the story, right? The forging of the ring, Gollum's murder of his cousin, I think it was his cousin, fellow halfling, shire mate, whatever, right? You got context. But you could easily have seen that. And this is how I introduced this character, Gollum. Isn't he weird? So again, I haven't actually used flashback, but I think that this could be one that could be helpful. And I think, for example, our Scum and Villainy campaign, I could see using, because Scum and Villainy itself always is using flashbacks as part of the game mechanic. It's kind of logical that we would use that. And so you have our crew and you flash back to something before we came up with the ghosts. Is that what they were called? Those guys who were all ethereal and stuff, right?
Yes, the ghosts.
There is some other triggering incident that sets up. Our past is catching up with us, which is always the thing that's happening when those sort of caper campaigns anyway, right?
Yeah. And then, there's always, you can ask the players, what do you want to do? How do you want to, what's interesting to you? I think that's been one of the fun things to flip it around a little bit, just because everyone of a certain ilk expects the GM to come.
Yes, this is very true.
Everything. It's not with everything. A lot of the more modern games, there's a more of a co-op-y feel to it. But if you're in a group that's been a little bit more hierarchical, let's call it, moving it to something more co-op-y just to kind of jumpstart the engine is not a bad way to go.
And especially if player engagement was one of the reasons why you went on hiatus in the first place. Right. If people didn't feel like that they had, that they were contributing to the campaign or they weren't being heard. I think part of this is all just kind of taking a look back on where you left off, why things ended that way, and then thinking about, oh, okay, well, how could I fix this going forward? I think another option is to begin in the middle of the action. So I have done this a couple of times, and I think this is useful when you need to grab your player's attention. You want to emphasize a particular tone, like action, you're racing to disarm the bomb, or dread, you find a mutilated corpse in the middle of a room, and you want to introduce new NPCs and PCs, but you want to do it in a more exciting way than just you meet in a bar. Or maybe you meet in the bar, but the first thing that happens is somebody gets hit with a flying beer bottle. Who threw it? Oh, wait, it's the bard. What the?
I think that's really important. You can say you all meet in a bar, or you can say you're not sure when the bar caught fire.
Right.
It's that, because I think that's like it's a little bit of a baby version of the in media res thing,
Right.
where it's not a car chase, but you're in this situation, and that's the thing that draws the people together. So I agree with you. I'm agreeing with you, and yes,
Right. Yeah, because I think the trope of you meet in a bar is a trope because it can work, but at the same time, like lighting the fuse off screen to begin with, that then gives rise to the next thing. Like, so I mean, they did this in Dragonlance, right? I think we had the heroes in the Lance have come together after their various journeys, and they're talking, and like there's some setup and talking. We meet, I think, like Tika and like the great hash browns or potatoes or whatever at the end of the last leaf, or I'm trying to remember the names of it.
Into the last home. Yeah.
Into the last home. And then like the Draconians attack, right?
Right.
Like suddenly the town is on fire and you have to escape, right? So yes, you got some exposition. Yes, you got some, hey, meet, was it Tenderfoot? Tasselhoff.
Tasselhoff, yeah.
Tasselhoff. He had some time. You can just imagine his PC, right? He had some time to steal some things. You had the Knight of Solamnia that like, sorry, no, don't do that. And then all of a sudden everything is on fire and everyone realizes, oh, you know what? Raceland, I hated that guy, but you know what? He just turned one of the Draconians to stone, so I guess I'm going to hold off on my grudge for a sec. But you're moving.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the moving, it's waves and ebbs and flows and all of that. It can't always be car chases and battles. I know some people who, their favorite part of the game is the theater of the mind part, where we're not battling, but it's the social interactions and the things they do in the town and the journey and, some puzzles, that kind of thing.
Right.
Because a lot of times combat is where it gets crunchy, and a lot of folks don't like the crunch.
Right.
There are definitely people who do. I tend to play with people that, for better or worse, and maybe this says more about me, they all seem to have a theater background of some kind. So they want to, they're less interested in the numbers and more in the role-playing aspect of it. So giving them an into that.
I think knowing your game is important too. I think it would be a lot easier to dive into the middle of the action in Savage Worlds or in a game that lends it, or Fate or anything that's like a little bit more rules light than, say, I don't know, 10th level characters in D&D 3rd edition. Like no one's going to want to come back.
I just started playing Dragon Age Inquisition again because it was just free on Epic a couple weeks ago. So I started, and it's one of those things where they just, when you click on the start screen, a big explosion happens, and that's where the game starts. You're right in the middle of it, and then it kind of does a little flashback to like, oh no, you're actually the good guy. Okay, cool. Like right away.
One of the things I've always wanted to try, and I haven't worked it into a game yet, but it might be in one of the next ones, is putting each game with a flash forward.
Ooh. Okay. Yeah.
So, and there's a lot of thought that has to go into that, right? Because you can't railroad your characters to the point where they actually get to that situation.
Right.
So it's got to be vague enough. It's got to be, giving them something not to shoot for, but to, this might be coming. This is the thing.
Right.
It kind of holds it out there as a thing that they can keep in the back of their minds. How the hell do we wind up there?
Right. Yeah, and there was a great arc for the comic book Stormwatch, which happened. They purposely, I think it was like 24 issues into the future. Like everything is going to go to crap. Right. People are dying left and right. The big bad is here. And then the next issue is, it's a year before that. Right now, in that case, it is kind of railroady, right? But it can also be good to know, like, there is this big thing coming. And depending on your players, people might want to work towards that story element. There's also the big bad thing happened, but what you don't see off screen is the mega gun or the, other MacGuffin that the players have assembled to deal with the big bad. So yes, the big bad is there, but they came up with a plan for dealing with them because they knew the big bad was coming, right?
And I will recommend, if you're going to do that flash forward thing, go and read Robert J. Sawyer's book, Flash Forward. Well worth it. They made a TV series out of it, and the TV series was good, but it only got one season.
Heroes?
But No. It was called Flash Forward. It starred John Cho. It was very good, but that book really does it well because it introduces a different type of uncertainty in your players. And it's the sort of thing that, to bring it back to the hiatus, could stretch through a hiatus. Like, you come back and you give them a flash forward.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of pulls them into the story.
And I mean, honestly, that's a way of, if you have a planned hiatus, like I think a lot of what we've talked about is unplanned hiatuses, you know, for whatever reason we stopped. But if you know you're stopping for the summer because you're just like, everybody's going to be gone, we're going to start in September. It can almost be like the post-credit scenes in your better Marvel movies where, right, like there's the setup to the thing that's going to happen for next time.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or, you know, like you say, it's like, it's setting the scene for the next arc. Either that's the thing you're going to kick off with, or that's the thing that's going to be the target of the next season. But I think setting it up as seasonal play, like you were saying before, Chris, lends you to being able to use some of these tools better.
Yep. Agreed.
So any other thoughts on different kind of structures for dealing with hiatuses, or are we good?
Only other thing that I could do, like, in terms of getting the players ready to come back after the hiatus, because a lot of the stuff that we've talked about is stuff that we as GMs can do. But
right.
To get the players, I guess, a little bit ready to go, one of the tools that I did before was I was like, take a look at your characters and think about what you want your next level to look like. That way they go back and kind of look at their characters and not just like the quick cursory glance of like, oh yeah, and then you spend the next entire 3 sessions going, oh, I forgot I had that ability.
Yeah, I like that idea.
Take a look at your characters, figure out what you want their next level to be, because you might be leveling up pretty quick once we get back into things. And then they start looking back at their characters. Like, yeah, I forgot I could do this, and I want to go here and do this. Then it also gives them a jumping point too. Yeah,
I think it works from a story perspective too, right? Like, or one feeds into the other. You know, what's one thing you'd like your character to be able to do in the next 3 sessions?
Yeah,
right. And because I think it gets the players engaged, and then they're getting a little bit excited about it as the DM or Game Master. It saves you time, or perhaps if you've been struggling, you want to relaunch, but you're not quite sure how to do it. Your players come to you with a bunch of ideas, and you're like, cool. All right. Well, thanks for joining us, everyone. You can find us at lairofsecrets.com.